All right, so we've just opened our digital doors here one more time. People are coming in. We're up to 60 so far. We'll see how many we get for this session. I guess, again, we'll give it another minute or two and see how many more we get before we get started. All right, starting to slow down now. We may certainly get a few more people trickling in the next few minutes. Now, this is a longer session. We're scheduled at least to go an hour and a half. It's currently 4:30 p.m. Eastern time. So this should certainly wrap up by 6 o'clock. We'll kind of play it by ear and see how much energy we have really and how engaged we are. But that's the schedule at least. So a little bit longer than our last couple sessions. And this is our last one of the day. So it's gone by fast. It's been fun. It's been different, but interesting to have this kind of experience and starting to get used to the online interactive process. So I hope you've enjoyed that. And, you know, it's something we'll keep in mind, as I say, for future Fair Vote Canada events, really either at the local level or national. There's lots of opportunity to use this kind of technology. So in our last session, it is a little bit more interactive, and we'll get into that in a minute here of how that's going to work. But first, I'll introduce our guests. First, we're very, very pleased, honored to be joined by Paul Manley. He is the Member of Parliament for Nanaimo-Ladysmith. He was first elected to the House of Commons in a by-election on May 6, 2019, so just over a year ago. That made him the second elected Green federal MP in Canadian history. And then, of course, he was re-elected in the federal election in October of last year. Paul's a filmmaker. He's a researcher and communications specialist. He'll be giving a bit of a talk and then participating in our session, but he'll be talking about the democratic deficit in Canada, the power of organizing, and moving beyond our own audience. So that's Paul Manley. I'll introduce Anna, and then we'll come back and get our session started. Now, of course, you've seen Anna Keenan throughout the day here as doubling as our Zoom expert, which we're very thankful for. And now she'll play a bit more of a leadership role here in leading this session. So Anna Keenan, she's been a climate and democracy campaigner for over a decade. She has worked as an organizer for the Australian Conservation Foundation, Avaaz in Europe, in Greenpeace International. Anna was the campaign director for the Coalition for PR on Prince Edward Island, where she lives now, which won the 2016 Plebiscite on proportional representation. So we were all very pleased with her for that and all of her efforts, and that got her even more involved with Fair Vote Canada. Anna currently works for 350.org as a fossil-free community manager, expanding locally led climate campaigning, coaching regional staff, and using online spaces to scale up their network. And she's been a member of Fair Vote Canada's National Council since 2017, for 3 years now. So her workshop with us today is called Organizing to Win. It's the practice of movement building and campaigning and how we create social change. So just like our last couple sessions there, Anna will give us another brief overview of Zoom and some of the features and how it's going to work for our last session. And then we'll carry on with Paul and Anna for the rest of the workshop.
All right, thank you very much for the intro, Ted. As with all of the previous sessions, 3 icons at the bottom. Just be aware this session is a little bit different. We're not going to use the Q&A function during this session, please, because we're not going to have a presentation followed by a Q&A session at the end. But if you have any technical questions, feel free to ask them there, and Ted will handle them for us, or you can use the chat. We're primarily going to use the chat function during this session. So if you want to chat with all attendees, type answers to group questions. If you want to agree or applaud, you can use ++. And if you want to volunteer to speak when there are opportunities for people, if anybody wants to answer a question live, you can put a star in the chat and we'll be able to take you off mute. So that's what we'll do. And as a reminder, just switch your chat to not just all panelists, but all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see. And if you would like to type in, where you're calling in from. We've got 120 participants on the line. That's always a great way to start. But I'll leave it there, and we'll hand over to Paul. So we're talking about organizing, and it's about it's this practice of democracy. So how do we use the tools that we've been given in a democratic system to make change? How do we organize, bring people together to achieve the changes that we collectively desire? And how do we make sure that our power is more than just the sum of our individual parts? And I think Paul Manley is a person who knows a lot about this. He's done a lot of change making in his life, and being the second ever Green elected to the House of Commons in Canada certainly required a lot of political organizing and community-based connection and movement building as well. So I'm going to hand over to Paul, and we'll hear from him first. We've got about 15 minutes of hearing from Paul, and we can do a little bit of a Q&A and discussion, and following that we'll move into some of the exercises and the organizing training, and we'll hear from Paul on, I suppose, how Greens view the proportional representation issue and the value that community organizing brings to political work. Over to you, Paul. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Anna, and thank you, Ted. I'm coming to you from Nanaimo territory here in Nanaimo, and I represent 4 different First Nations, actually. It's Nanaimo, Snanawas, Staminas, and Liaxin, and so I'd like to recognize that I'm an uninvited guest on their territory. This is where I grew up, Nanaimo-Ladysmith area, so it's a real honor and privilege to be representing this community. I just want to start by talking about the importance of the work that you're doing with Bear Vote Canada. I am one of 3 Green Party MPs, and I just want to share with you, I'm going to start just by sharing my screen to show you the election results and to talk a little bit about this. So these are the results of the last federal election. The Liberal Party got 33.1% of the vote, 5.9 million voters, and they got 157 MPs. And for each MP, they represent about 37,000 people. The Conservatives got more than the Liberals, 6.1 million votes, 34.4% of the vote, and they got 121 MPs. So they got a higher percentage of the vote, and 50,870 people per MP, voters per MP. But they didn't win power. And then the NDP, they got 2.8 million votes, 15.9% of the voters, and 24 MPs. So each NDP MP represents 118,720 voters. And the Bloc Québécois, which had a concentration in Quebec, got 1.376 million voters, 7.7% of the vote, 32 MPs. So more than the NDP, for less than half of what the NDP got in terms of votes, and they represent 43,000 on average voters, each MP. Now the Greens got 1.16 million votes for 6.5%, and we got 3 MPs. And so I like to remind the other parties that I represent 387,000 voters. And when you compare that to the Liberals, who represent 37,000, or the Conservatives, 50,000, I sometimes hear from the other MPs that the Greens are always trying to grab more time in Parliament. And I remind them that I represent 10 times the number of voters that they do on average. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is how our Parliament works. So in the House of Commons, we are the only Westminster Parliament that has this system of official party status. And you have to have 12 MPs to have official party status. And that means that if you want a voice on committee to be recognized in the committee process, if you don't have official party status, you don't have a voice on committee. So I have to ask other MPs to give up a little bit of their time on committee so I can question witnesses or bring my voice to the committee process. And you know, one of 3 members of the caucus, I have actually 10 critic areas, and I sit on 9 different committees. So I do have volunteers that that sit in on those committees. We have students that take care of the monitoring the committees for us. We can read everything in Hansard afterwards, but I have to pick and choose which committees I'm going to sit on. These days with Zoom, I can be on committee meetings 6-8 hours a day. Because there's 3 committees that I'm responsible for during this pandemic. So I know this is a workshop about organizing, and I want to just tell you, you know, a little bit about myself. My dad was an MP. He was a NDP member of Parliament. My mom was an activist in the feminist movement in the late 60s and early 70s. My parents were both human rights activists for as long as I've been around. And I grew up in a family where, you know, the rest of the family was politically engaged. And, you know, my earliest memories of going to a protest were to free Leonard Peltier and listening to the drums at the Supreme Court building in Vancouver. You know, I must have been about 7 years old or so during those rallies. And I started organizing when I was a teenager. My dad was elected when I was 16. We moved to Ottawa. I was part of a group called Youth Action for Peace. And we did a lot of different activities. We had actions, you know, when George Bush Sr. came to town. We did actions when Armex was in Ottawa, which was an arms bazaar at Lansdowne Park in a public facility where they were the arms industry was selling arms to the who's who of dictators around the world. And I was involved in a lot of environmental action. And so I learned at an early age, like how to engage. I've been involved in a whole bunch of different organizations. I've worked for Friends of the Earth, Pollution Probe, Greenpeace, Western Canada Wilderness Committee, and I was involved with the Council of Canadians for a long time. I was the chapter contact here in Nanaimo starting in 2007, and I was on their national board for 3 years. And a lot of the things that I learned as an activist is, number one, you have to stop talking to your own audience. You got to get out into where other people are. And if you want to reach people, preaching to people is not the right way to do it. So you have to engage people, and we would do a lot of fun actions. So, you know, one of the actions we did around pipelines and tankers, we have a regatta here that's for the Nanaimo Child Development Society, where they have a silly boat regatta. When you have to build a boat out of materials, you have to build it that morning, and then you get involved in a race, and you go and race out around a series of pylons, and you come back, and there's about 10,000 people that watch this thing. So 2 years we got involved with the Council of Canadians. The 1 year we built an oil derrick. You know, so we had this oil derrick on a raft, had a big bucket of molasses. We were all wearing suits. I had my corporate minions, and then I had a pump, and I pumped molasses to shoot up a geyser, because at the time they were talking about offshore drilling, the Harper government, and lifting the moratorium on offshore drilling on the BC coast, and we thought that was ridiculous. So we had this raft, and we were the last ones to come in, and we won an award for the silliest sailors that year. We went in another time with we built an oil tanker, and we hinged it in the middle. And as soon as we pushed off, we pulled the pins, and the boats, you know, split in two. And we had, again, molasses, and we were in suits, and we dumped it all over each other. And I had a sign that said, you know, don't worry, we might clean this up. And hoots and hollers from the audience. They all knew what we were up to. Like, we were talking about the oil industry. The tanker was the SS Harper. It was flagged first of all in Canada, then Liberia. I can't remember where else, but you know, so then we made videos out of those and shared those live. When there was the Pierre Poutine scandal, which was a vote scandal, we did a thing right in the middle of downtown Nanaimo, where we had a ballot out and you could come and vote. And when you voted, you plugged your finished ballot into the ballot box and it went straight into a shredder. So you could hear the shredder fire up when you when you were doing this. And so each of these different actions, we would have people that went through the audience as well and gave leaflets to people to tell them what we were up to. With the tankers, we actually had a very interesting piece of paper that looked like a stock, and it was for the Enrich Corporation. And the slogan for the Enrich Corporation was, "The more we drill, the more we drill, the more you spill, the more you earn." And it was based on what had happened with Boots and Coots and Halliburton in the Gulf Coast. So Boots and Coots was bought up by Halliburton 2 weeks before the I can't remember, the Deepwater Horizon accident, and it was Halliburton that actually set the wellhead on that drilling rig. And so, some people call that a corporate conspiracy. We just call it good corporate planning, that they actually bought the cleanup rights to the whole Gulf Coast before the wellhead that they set failed. And they made billions and billions of dollars off it. So that was our slogan: the more we drill, the more we spill, the more you earn. And we were joking at the time that we had bought the rights to clean up on the Georgia Strait, so that any tankers that spilled in the Georgia Strait, we had the rights to clean it up. And we were a vertically integrated company, so we were drilling for oil, we were shipping oil, and also if we spilled oil, we had the contract to clean it up, so we were going to make lots of money. And I gave this to a journalist, and the journalist thought that I was actually trying to sell him stock at this fun family event, because I was wearing a suit and tie and everything else. And I came up to him and I was super serious, and he got really angry with me. But he had taken the thing and stuffed it in his pocket. And then later he saw us out in the boat and he realized that he'd been totally spoofed. And he wrote an article about it, and we got a ton of earned media about our stand against shipping bitumen off out of the Westridge terminal. So using ideas that engage people to get them thinking about things is super important. I know we had a referendum here on proportional representation, and it was really designed to fail. It was difficult for people to understand, and it was difficult for those, like, I know some policy wonks and procedural nerds who couldn't remember from day to day which of those three different things that people were voting for, to explain it to the average person. And so people who were supportive of electoral reform looked at this thing and went, "I don't understand this." And I know some people who supported electoral reform that told me afterwards, they said, "I just couldn't vote for it. So I just voted no, because I didn't understand what it was, what the meaning of this was, what these three choices were." And I think that clarity is super important. In this last parliament, I've been elected twice I was elected twice in 6 months. It's only been a year that I've been an MP. One of the things I would tell you about running, I ran in 2015. I immediately got myself a core team of people that I knew and trusted, that are very smart and smarter than me, and got them to sign on and to help me and help with communications and coordination and working with volunteers and volunteer outreach. And I just surrounded myself with smart people who were dedicated to helping me get elected. And I brought that same team together in 2019 when we had a by-election, and just gave them a ton of autonomy. It's like, I trust you people to do the right thing. If you're going to put words in my mouth, let me see those words first. Like, if you're going to create communication and marketing tools, like, pass them by me. Let's make sure that I understand the messaging and everything else that you want to get across. And it's not that I understand it, but I agree with it and I'm on board, and just let them go. And so we had a lot of young people involved in our campaign who had great ideas and was just like, yeah, I love it, do it, right? And we had the youngest member of our campaign team, who was, solidly there all the time, was 13 years old. Best phone canvasser we had. He was just really dedicated to what he was doing. And we gave him a lot of freedom and a lot of latitude, and respected his input to what we were up to. And that's really important when you're building a team and working with people. I've worked on teams with people before where people are really controlling, where they're really proprietary over their part of whatever it is they want. They want to make sure that they have the control over how things are done like that. And those things, that doesn't work very well. One of the things about being very open and democratic, though, is that you can have people that get in who can stick the stick into the spokes and cause a lot of problems and dissension in a group setting. So you have to be very careful of that. Provocateurs, or people that are actually there for the wrong reasons and may have been planted to be there. Some people may know that I shot video in 2007 of 3 police officers with masks and trying to look like radicals, with masks and rocks, attacking their own riot squad in Montebello, Quebec, and at an SPP, Anti-Security Prosperity Partnership rally. And Dave Coles was told by a bunch of real anarchists that they were actually police officers, and he called them out. And anytime you're organizing, you can have people who have inserted themselves for the very specific purpose of unraveling what it is that you're doing, to create dissension in a group, to create problems, and to help undermine what it is that you're up to. So you just, like, I gave a lot of latitude to my core team, and they gave a lot of latitude to other people that worked on the team, with a kind of a ladder of engagement. So, you get people to start out at a certain level of activity, and once they've shown that they can do those things, you move them up. And if they've got good ideas that they bring forward, and they can participate in a way that's healthy and respectful of everybody else, other opinions and things like that, then you just keep engaging people. And the more people are engaged in the activity, and the more ownership they have over it, the more they're going to do. And we did a lot of things that were just plain fun, like sine waves and other activities in the community that were enjoyable for people to be engaged in. And one of the things we did with the campaign is we had this huge tree that once you had done 2 or 3 activities, you got your photo taken in, and you were on the tree of engagement. And so we kind of rewarded people as they went along. We gave them tough tasks. So canvassing is one thing that people just don't want to do, right? And canvassing is something with Fair Vote, you're going to need to do that as well. You got to go and find people who you want to bring into your circle of understanding. And so when you have referendums and things like that, you need to go and knock on doors. And people don't realize that it's not as difficult as it seems until you actually go and do it. One last thing, I just want to talk about petitions, and I am happy to sponsor petitions. It's hard to do paper petitions right now. If you get 25 signatures on a paper petition, I can table it in the House of Commons, and I did a bunch on a call for a citizens' assembly on proportional representation, and we had an electronic petition which got just under 2,000 signatures, which was kind of disappointing. I would happily do more electronic petitions, and we could do a series of them, open them up for 30, 60, 90, or 120 days is what the choices are. And they're a good way to bring this up in the House of Commons over and over again. But we have to organize how we get those petitions out and get signatures on it. The petition with the most signatures on it right now in terms of e-petitions is from the gun lobby, because they don't like the new gun regulations and legislation. And those people know how to organize, and we have to figure out how we get our message out and get more people engaged to do that as well. So I'm going to pass it back to Anna and open it up for questions.
All right, thank you so much, Paul. I didn't realize that you're also a Greenpeace alumni. So between the two of us, we've got two former Greenpeace alumni. And I just want to say, as an activist myself, how inspiring it is to know that there are really strong activists like you, people coming up through social and economic justice and environmental justice movements who are now sitting in the House of Commons in Ottawa. It's not all, lawyers and accountants and so on, and CEOs. We do have people who are coming straight out of social movements, moving into those spaces. And I really appreciate some of the lessons that you shared there, which speak to, I think, a long history of organizing experience about the ladder of engagement and bringing people in closer to the work, constantly growing your team, letting go of control and trusting people in order to grow your team and grow the movement. I think there's a lot of lessons in that we can take to heart in Fair Vote Canada. I am going to, we might be able to take like one or two questions here, but I do sort of want to keep us on track and move on to the content of the organizing training. And here we go. Yeah, I'll ask Ted if you want to bring up maybe one or maximum two questions for Paul at this stage before we move on.
Yeah, sure. We've got a couple here. Ken Robertson asks, if the BC NDP and Greens support PR, why did they agree to a referendum when they had the opportunity to just introduce PR like New Zealand did, and perhaps hold a referendum after an election or two? And then the citizens of BC, of course, would have had a firsthand experience on how each system works. Paul, do you have any reflection on that?
Well, that was the Green Party did want to just go straight through with legislation and then have the referendum afterwards. And they had to settle for a compromise with the NDP, who wanted to have a referendum. People scream about having referendums on these kind of issues, and referendums can work as long as the questions are clear, as long as you have clear rules around spending and access for media and things like that, so you have a level playing field. And we just haven't had a level playing field in referendums in BC on proportional representation.
Yep. Okay, thanks for that. And one more question quickly. This one's from Michael Thomas to Paul. He asks, concretely, how did you keep out the provocateurs while also giving apparently talented people lots of latitude? I think he's talking about during the course of campaigning and organizing and stuff.
Well, to start with, I got myself a campaign manager and a communications manager that I knew very well and trusted. So I recruited people into key positions that I knew well and trusted, and they knew me well. And then we just opened up the whole process where they were recruiting people. And, like in a campaign team, we've had people come and go. We've had people that have tried positions and failed at that position and then had to move into a different position. And so, you have to, you have to try something. Some things don't work, but the key thing is having, having a core team that I trusted, that I knew totally had my back, and I didn't worry about anything that they were going to do. That if there was things that they needed me to know, they would let me know. If they needed to ask me, they would ask me. And so there was a complete level of trust there. And then they just that ladder of engagement. So people would walk in the door, they wouldn't have access to, you know, databases and everything else right off the bat. They had to prove themselves and work their way through that process of that engagement and showing that they could go out and knock on doors and come back with a sheet with some people that were convinced to vote green and put up lawn signs.
Yep, that's a good point. People need to kind of earn the trust, certainly from someone like you who's putting yourself out there to be elected. To, you know, it's your face and your name out there. You want to have people you can trust for sure.
Yeah.
Anna, should we go to the next part? Okay.
I'm gonna move us right along. Something's happened with. That's so funny. I've been like guiding people on technology all day, and now my technology is glitching. 2 seconds. Share screen. All right. So we're going to get into the sort of organizing training piece. I want to flag, like, already so many of the topics that Paul has raised, like how to recruit somebody, how to manage a campaign manager, how to delegate tasks, how to bring people up a ladder of engagement. All of these things are skills in and of themselves, and they only come with experience. So, you know, try things. Don't be afraid to fail, learn. You will grow your skills over time and with experience. Today, I want to focus on a couple of things. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll leave with an understanding of what is community organizing, a bit of an understanding of how to build movements, and a few concrete tools that you can use to define your team, to define your shared purpose or the motivation for your team working together. And I think motivation is the key to starting to grow a team. You want to have people feeling inspired so that they want to join your team, so you can recruit them and organize them. And I'm going to give you a tool on how to design campaign strategy as well. And one of the reasons that I chose to focus on this, it's sort of about goals and strategy rather than about tactics. You know, tactics include how to get heaps of people on a Facebook page, or how to design a creative action or a communication strategy. You know, what's the frame that we should use, or how should we design motivational messages that can break through. All of those, I think, are tactics, and you can do heaps of reading in organizing literature about those. But talking about goals and strategy is a sort of higher level of thinking around community organizing. And I want to share a quote, I think it's from Sun Tzu's The Art of War. And it says, "Strategy without tactics is the slow road to victory. And tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat." And this is something that I actually see a lot in activist groups. I see activist groups coming together, and they'll have a meeting and they'll talk about, okay, like, what's the next thing that we're going to do? What are we going to put on our Facebook page this week? You know, shouldn't we be on Twitter as well? Should we send an email about this? Like, and it's really focusing on the tactics and the next action. But sometimes it's absent that higher level conversation of what are we here for, and how are we really going to shift power to achieve the change that we want in society. So it was actually that there's a great activist trainer in Toronto whose name is Jessica Bell, and she's also Australian in her heritage, but she's currently elected as an MPP in I think University Rosedale. And she has a great blog from when she was an activist trainer, talking about, you know, 5 things I wish I knew when I started as an activist. And one of those things is focus, and choosing to focus. I think so many of us are aware of so many social injustices, economic injustices, environmental injustices, and democratic injustices, which is why we work together here at Fair Vote Canada. But to achieve change on any one of these issues does require some people saying, you know, this is my issue, and I'm going to cut through, I'm going to make a shift in this issue. I'm not just going to, you know, post on Facebook about 20 different issues and, you know, sort of declare my intentions and wish that things were better. I'm actually going to focus on 1 or 2 or 3 things maximum, and I'm going to move the needle on those issues. So that's what I'm going to try to get at with this exercise. I wanted to share, I had originally designed this training for, I thought about 70 people were going to show up, and with about 70 people, I thought we could have done breakouts, but with 140 people, I think it's probably a little too many people to handle that technology shift well. So I'm going to describe a concept called the organizing statement. That'll take about 10 minutes. And then I'm going to leave you alone for like 3 or 4 minutes to each write your own organizing statement out. So grab, a pencil and paper, and you're going to write out your own organizing statement. And then once we've done that exercise, I'll get a couple of people to share in the chat, or if a few people want to share on video, we can bring people up onto video and audio, and we can share the organizing statements. And then once we've debriefed a little on this concept of the organizing statement, we're going to move to what I call the 4 questions of strategy. And we'll see if we can fit that all in the desired time. And I'm not following the chat, so Ted, if there's anything in the chat that you think I need to be aware of, please just interrupt me and raise it up. So the organizing statement is as follows, and I'm going to share a few examples, but this is sort of the template. We, the group of organizers, are organizing our constituency to achieve their shared motivating goal by our target date, and then by following a primary believable strategy. And so we're going to talk through each of those 5 elements. If you are an activist and an organizer and you're trying to create change on an issue, you should be able to describe the change that you're trying to create and the shape of your team with what's called an organizing statement. And this concept of the organizing statement comes from Marshall Gantz, Professor Marshall Gantz, who now teaches executive leadership at Harvard, and he was the architect behind the Obama campaign, and his background is in union organizing and organizing with farm workers in the US. So the first concept is organizers, and I'll invite you all to think, in your own activist project. This could be on proportional representation, it could be on another issue. Just pick an issue in your mind that is the one that you want to focus on today. And the first question is, who are you organizing with? Who is your team? You should be able to name these people individually. So, Paul talked about his campaign manager and pulling in people who he trusted to be close to the core. You should be able to name these people like one by one, anywhere from sort of 3 to 15 people, probably 3 to 7 makes a really good core team. But you should be able to name, who is my team? Marshall Gantz talks about 4 steps in building a campaign, and it's people, purpose, power, path, but it starts with people. Even before deciding your purpose, you decide, who am I working with? Who are my people? And so we try to answer that question. So who is your team? The next concept is constituency. So who do you serve? What's the broader community that you're a part of, who your organizing work is in service of? What is it that makes that group unique? What does that group of people have in common? And you might list out sort of 2 to 5 points of commonality. They might have a shared identity. They might do similar activities. They might live in the similar place, have similar interest, or they might have similar practices. So who is the constituency? What do they have in common? And then also, how is the group diverse? So, in Fair Vote Canada, I would say that, the constituency is people all across Canada who are interested in proportional representation and seeing that become a reality. But we are diverse. We are young. We are old. We are newcomers. We are settlers. We are, I was going to say we are Indigenous and First Nations people as well, but to be honest, I see very little participation of First Nations people within Fair Vote Canada. But we might state our intention to be diverse, and we can say this is not about certain types of identities. We are, rich and poor, young and old, multiracial. There are some other campaigns where we might choose to focus a constituency on something that is identity-based. So if you are working on racial justice, you might decide that your community is, Black and minority ethnic communities, for example. But you want to be able to define who is your constituency. And then the next two elements are the shared motivating goal and the target date. So the shared motivating goal, it's not our shared motivating goal as the organizers, but really the shared motivating goal for the constituency. What is it that motivates the constituency to want to work together? What is it that makes them want to put time and effort in to achieving the goal? What do they want to change? What's the problem that they have that they want to solve? And by when do they want to solve it? So we try to define the shared motivating goal in this way. And very often that can be a sort of quite a big and broad statement, like, we want a fair electoral system. But we need to try to make it more specific. So the questions that I'll ask here are, how will the constituency know when they have won? How will their lives be improved? And if we ask the question, have you achieved your goal? Will it have a yes or no answer? And do we have a specific timeline that we're hoping to achieve that goal on? So for example, in Canada, I think we would all agree that, we would have a fair electoral system when proportional representation is enacted in legislation in Canada. That's probably a goal that's quite some distance away, and it's very hard for us to put a timeline on it, but we might be able to pick something that's a closer goal to us and say, we're going to work towards having a citizens' assembly enacted or initiated within the next 2 years, for example. Or enacting municipal reform, and you might pick a specific municipality. And if you want to go deeper into goal setting, you can use the SMART goal format, or I prefer the SMART-E goal. Is it specific, measurable, ambitious, realistic, time-bound, inclusive, equitable? You can look up SMART-E goals online and sort of use that as a checklist for setting goals. But I think it's very important that we're able to define who are we working with and what's our purpose, what's our shared motivating goal. So I'll go through a few examples here before I give you a few minutes of work time. The organizing statement for the 2016 proportional representation plebiscite campaign in PEI, I actually looked back in my records to find my organizing statement for it. And it was we, the 4 staff of the PEI PR Coalition, so Jordan Bobber, who I think is on this call, myself, Mark Green, and Sasha Burton. We are organizing people who live on PEI who care about proportional representation to achieve our goal of a win, which is at least 40,000 people voting 1 and 2 for PR in the plebiscite by the target date of 7th of November 2016. So that was our organizing statement, and everything that we did was oriented towards that goal. And then we'll get into strategies on how we achieve that later. In my own election campaign, Anna Keenan from Molpec, I was the Green candidate in Molpec in the federal election last year. We, a core team of 9 volunteers, are organizing people who support myself, both locally and nationwide, to achieve a tripling of the Green vote, which meant 6,100 votes for a very small riding on PEI, and maybe even a win, which we thought would have taken 30% of the vote in Molpec riding by the election date, 21st of October 2019. I ended up getting 26% of the votes, didn't win, but I did achieve the goal of tripling the Green vote in my riding. These first 2 examples are sort of easier because they're very numerical and they have a fixed target date, which is winning a referendum or winning an election. But I'm going to go through a few examples which are less tangible and less tied to electoral dates. When I worked at Greenpeace, I worked on the Facebook Unfriend Coal campaign. One Facebook, so this was in like 2010, 2011, one Facebook data center where all of our bits and bytes go. It actually uses the same amount of electricity as about 100,000 households. So it's about the same electricity as 1/3 or half of Prince Edward Island. to give you a sense of scale. And they've got, a couple of dozen data centers around the world. And so at Greenpeace, we, a core team of 7 staff, who I could name for you, we were organizing Greenpeace supporters worldwide who have Facebook accounts to achieve the Facebook Corporation having 100% renewable energy as a criteria in its siting policy for data centers by the end of 2011. So previously, their siting policy said we're going to choose a site where the electricity cost is cheapest, which generally meant that they added a lot of demand in places where there was a lot of coal-fired power. But our campaign resulted in, after 2 years of work, a change in the siting policy so that they preferred locations where there was a significant excess of renewable energy, for example, in the north of Sweden, where they have a lot of hydropower. And we were very enthusiastic. We were just really excited when we managed to achieve that outcome. Jim, the rural-urban divide in PEI is something I'd encourage you to reach out to me on Facebook after this, or send me an email, and we can chat about the divide. It wasn't so much rural-urban divide as up west and the rest of the island. So I live in a rural area that voted in support of proportional representation in that election. I think 1 or 2 more examples. Bike Friendly Charlottetown, a small activist group I'm part of now. We, a core team of 7 volunteers, are organizing Charlottetown's would-be casual and commuter cyclists, or bike curious people, to achieve a long-term plan for a network of interconnected active transport lanes in Charlottetown, and work beginning on constructing it by by mid-2021. So that's a smaller organizing statement. Another one I've done recently, we, 10 interested staff, are organizing our co-workers who are concerned about unfair disciplinary practices and lack of management transparency to achieve a staff union by November 2019. That was 350.org in the US. 350 is a wonderful organization and now has unions, which has moved us forward, which is wonderful. Even within a family, you can have an organizing statement. Me and my father-in-law are organizing all our extended family to achieve a surprise virtual birthday party for my husband by the 5th of May, 2020. So these are just some examples, from big to small, all sorts of scales. So before you can get into strategy, before you can get into tactics, you need to know, what am I working on and why? So this is where I'll say, you have to choose your campaign at the right scale. All campaigns that I've mentioned have served a larger goal, a broader vision. And every campaign also has smaller sort of mini campaigns and projects within them. So within the Bike Friendly Charlottetown campaign, we did a project which was hosting an event, but that event in turn contributed to a larger goal that we had. So don't get too hung up on, what's the goal. Just try to choose a goal that is the right scale and the right timeline for your campaign and that people are excited to work on. It could be a goal that's a month away. It could be a goal that's 18 months away. You probably don't want to choose a goal that's 5 years away, because that misses that sense of momentum and motivation. So I'm going to pause for a minute here, and I'm going to go off video and be quiet for 3 minutes. And I want people to write for themselves, pick a group, pick your family, pick your political party, pick, your NGO, choose a campaign that you're working on. Design the campaign for me in 3 minutes by completing an organizing statement. And we're missing the final line, which is about strategy, but we're going to cover that afterwards. So take 3 minutes, and when you are finished, just put a plus in the chat so that I know that you're finished. And when I see a critical mass of those, I'll invite a few people to share their statements. You might even want to type your statement into the chat. Okay, 3 minutes. All right, so I see some people are saying that they're finished the work now. So I did estimate well at 3 minutes. Some people are also sharing theirs in the chat. So feel free to do that. And I might pull a couple of people up on voice as well to share theirs, and or I don't know, for time constraints, we might also keep it to just the webinar chat. Jordan Bober, I love yours. The volunteers of the Green Party of PEI are organising people who want a sustainable future to form a green government capable of implementing green policies by the next election around 2023. So I'm going to offer a few comments to, I'll invite people to just keep entering in your organising statements into the chat. And I'm going to offer a few comments on them, and the ones that I see. So I've got 3 in there so far. This is just a little bit of coaching. And the thing about organising statements is that they can always be improved. So you're not likely to get it right the first time. I certainly didn't when I went through my own organising training. But I'm going to pick out the point from Letitia Charbonneau. She's used the statement, we, a group of 3 retired teachers, I love how tight that organising team is, will work to, and this is the goal, raise awareness among other Ontario retired teachers. So Ontario retired teachers is the constituency. That's great. And the goal here is to raise awareness, to lobby our pension fund and our retirees association to lobby for total reform of the LTC by 2022. So I'm going to pick on the words raise awareness. I actually created a slide for this one as well. Part of my organising training was around awareness raising and education, and there was a lot of emphasis that awareness raising is not campaigning and is not a valid organising goal. It's a tactic, and it's a tempting tactic. If you raise awareness, then hopefully it results in some change, but it should only be used really strategically. Who are you raising awareness amongst? What are you raising their awareness for? When are you doing it? How are you doing it? And why? Because raising awareness does not always result in change. I think we see this as a very strong example I'll use is the racial justice movement. I think most people are aware that we have a racial justice problem in North America. Black Lives Matter has cut through, and we've raised awareness very significantly. But now we're at the point where we need to create change. So I love that you've got, Letitia, pressure the Pension Fund and Retirees Association to get them to lobby for total reform of the LTC. So I think that question of when do you know if you've succeeded, it's probably when your pension fund and retirees association starts to do that work to lobby for total reform of the LTC. Cool. Stephen Cohen, your statement was around an action team organising a letters to the editor writing group. I'd say that organising a letters to the editor writing group is, that's your constituency. To write about the principle of how PR would help solve the issue. So again, I would say this is very tactical because you don't know when you've won. Is when you've won that you're starting to get letters placed, or why are you getting those letters placed? What is it that you more concretely want to change? Who's your target? What are you aiming to change? And Jordan, your statement on the volunteers of the Green Party PEI, I would say that's quite broad rather than a narrow like group of 3 to 15 core organisers. And there's heaps more comments that are coming in. Cool. So Michael has a very big, ambitious organising statement. 20 core organisers of the Manitoba Energy Justice Coalition are organising Manitobans concerned about climate change to achieve a Green New Deal for Manitoba by the next provincial legislature in 2023 or 2024. As a 350.org employee, I'm a huge fan of the Green New Deal. I do feel that the Green New Deal is a rather abstract concept now, and how would you know if a Green New Deal has been implemented? We need to actually see a list of key specific policies. So yeah, Michael, the size of the core group, I would say 3 to 7 people. you know, 15 at the absolute maximum. But yeah, I see, yeah, there's more coming in. I can't read all of them, but that's great. So these are just a few examples of the organizing statement. So let me pull up my screen again, my presentation. So a warning about awareness raising. Is the goal to raise awareness, or is awareness raising a step towards a larger goal, like seeing a piece of legislation implemented, or seeing a real physical change in the community, like a bike lane built in bricks and mortar and concrete? And I just encourage people to try to choose really concrete goals that you can know for sure whether you've achieved them or not. And how to measure awareness raising is also a big challenge. Often it can be measured by opinion polls, but there's a temptation to think that just because you're putting a lot of content out into the world that you're achieving change, when that content might only be being read by the same choir of people, which speaks to what Paul was talking about before, needing to reach beyond the choir. So, you know, maybe you set a goal to have 4,000 people receive training, and that could be your awareness raising goal, but it becomes much more concrete. Cool. Okay, so we already did your turn. That's great. We did a bit of a report back and some notes. We've got half an hour left. I see some people are having to step off. That's okay. There are lots of engagement layers within your constituency, and Paul talked about climbing the ladder of engagement. I'm going to talk about the engagement pyramid, or the engagement onion, it's sometimes called. When you think about your whole constituency of people, they start on the outside just sort of observing your team's work, and then they might opt in and start following your team's work. Then they'll start endorsing it and promoting your work to other people. Then they'll start contributing to your work, volunteering, maybe donating. Then you might invite them even closer to the core and, you know, let them take on key pieces of ownership, give away that control, and then you might bring them right into the organizing core team. So this is a concept that we use called the engagement pyramid, or the engagement onion, and we are always wanting to think about how do we grow every layer. We tend, in the age of social media, to focus on like the number of followers on our Facebook page as a measure of the size and impact of our organizations, but typically neglected are the steps that are closer to the core. So what actions do we ask our followers to take? How are we inviting them to contribute? How are we giving more people power so that they become co-owners of the campaign? If you want to build your movement, you want to be providing that ladder of engagement so that people can come closer and you can grow every single layer of that campaign, not only the most passive outside layers. So I think we're getting to the point where you know, people have started to develop their organizing statement. They might be considering how to make it more concrete. That covers sort of the first 4 points. And then the last point here is about following a primary believable strategy. And I talk about a primary strategy here because there's always sort of, you know, 10 or 20 different paths that we could take to change, but your group should be focused on 1 or 2, maybe 3 at most, pathways to change that you really put all of your resources into. And I'm going to share here the 4 questions of strategy, which I've used with a number of different groups to help develop a shared understanding. So the questions are, what is the goal? Which I think we've covered a little bit in the organizing statement already. Who has the decision-making power to make this goal happen? So that'll define your campaign target. Sometimes the decision-making power is not some higher authority, but it's actually the community itself. And so your target is changing the minds of people around you. But very often, especially in government decision making, there is a specific target, a decision maker, a person with clear responsibility and authority for enabling the change that you want to make. Those first two questions are usually pretty quick and easy, and it's important that you should develop these 4 questions of strategy not on your own, but with your core team. So with that team of sort of 3 to 7 to 15 people, these 4 questions of strategy make a really great 1-hour workshop to go through with the group and see if you can come up with aligned answers. Questions 1 and 2 are usually pretty quick and easy. You should be able to answer them in 10 or 15 minutes with the whole group of people agreeing. But then questions 3 and 4, they take longer. This is where you'll need to take the time with your team to brainstorm. People will develop multiple different options, and then you might have to go through a narrowing down and a prioritization of okay, where are our areas of focus? So once you've got your goal and your target, question 3 is, why hasn't the target done this yet? Why haven't they made this decision? Why haven't they delivered on this goal yet? What are the barriers that have been holding them back? And I can share my slide deck. I'll share it now. Yeah, I will share my slide deck after the call. I think I haven't got it set. I'll have to give. I'll do that after the call. So I know that Anita is sending notes out after the call. But why haven't they made the change yet? What are the barriers? So we looked at this in bike-friendly Charlottetown, for example, and we identified that the decision makers were really like these 10 politicians, some of whom were local councillors and some of whom were provincial level people with pulling the purse strings, but they had names and addresses. They weren't vague decision-making bodies, really individuals. And we asked, why haven't they done this yet? And we came up with, I think there were probably 15 ideas generated, but then we went through a prioritization exercise to land on, they weren't aware that there was a bike constituency out there. They didn't have the evidence that a bike-friendly town would also contribute to their existing public goals on health, on economy, on reducing traffic, on all of these things. And they didn't have a long-term vision. And so we then said, okay, those are our 3 main barriers. And then we moved to question 4. What are the resources and the power that we have as a small group of volunteers in bike-friendly Charlottetown to overcome each of those 3 barriers? And so our strategies then became, we need to demonstrate a bike constituency, so grow the movement and make that very visible. We need to show a lot of evidence about how a bike-friendly Charlottetown aligns with their existing public goals. So that's research, evidence, lobbying meetings, constant presentation of facts to the 10 decision makers through all sorts of different mechanisms. And in addition, the third strand was around long-term visioning. And so we had people from, we're engaging in a process where people from other cities that have already gone through this transition are sharing their vision and sharing how great it is to live in this city and how they developed their long-term plans. So those are what I would suggest as the 4 questions of strategy. They're really helpful to go through with your organizing team. And you need to have alignment on these within your team. If you find yourself at like a deep disagreement with someone else in your team about the strategy, you should probably not be working together. Form, if you've want to go in one direction and someone else on your team wants to go a different direction, then form 2 separate organizations. And one of those totally different directions might attract more volunteers and have more success. But I think this speaks to what Paul was talking about before, is like, to achieve change, we need to build movements and bring people together who share goals and share common strategies. And if you've got division within your group, or if you've got one person who keeps trying to push their strategy that no one else is interested in, then that's going to be a huge barrier to building your movement. And I believe that movements are built when there is a motivating goal and a believable strategy. So if people believe that following your strategy is going to result in change, they will want to join your group. They will say, this is the most effective place that I can put my volunteer time into. So there are, I'm sure that you've all been in meetings of groups that want to achieve sorts of change, but they don't have particularly effective meetings, and it's demotivating, and you eventually drift off and you're attracted towards another group that has more membership. So more membership and a clearer strategy, so that you know that every minute you're spending with that group is contributing to change. That motivation, that sense that you can make a difference as a citizen is really, I think it's the root of democracy. We all have power as citizens. And when your group can hit on that sweet spot, that yes, engaging with this group will result in change, that's when you know that your group is going to succeed. And I think I've developed a pretty good antenna now for feeling whether I'm on a team that is going to win or not. Like you can just feel it, the positive momentum in some teams versus the sort of the uphill battle in other teams as well. Paul, you're back on video. Did you have a point you wanted to share here?
Yeah, I was just going to say you have to embrace the change that you want to see. So if you want, more openness and transparency and democracy, then that's how you have to operate. And if you want more engagement from people, then you have to operate in those ways. One of the things that I missed saying is that a lot of times, people that are deeply engaged in these kind of ideas, we get really wonky in how we communicate to people. And that is a key thing that we need to address and deal with, is that you need to reach people where they are and be able to communicate with them where they are. And so listening is key when I'm at the doorstep, when I'm talking to somebody about an idea, when I'm meeting somebody on the street, listening to their ideas, but also giving them bits and bytes that are easy to absorb and understand. And that was like, the idea of going to community events like Silly Boats with leaflets and information and engagement games. The other game that we had, we had the stock at the one thing, but we had a card game at the other one where it was pick a card and everybody was a loser. Because something happened, you had a spill in your yard, or the river was poisoned, or, all these things happened to different people, and we gave them breadcrumbs and our sympathies at the end. And we just engaged everybody out in the park. And then when we did our shtick out on the water, everybody knew what we were about and what we were doing, and they got the message and they had fun learning about it, and walked away with a little souvenir of our silliness. So trying to make sure that we're, like, I know when you go to the door and you start to talk to somebody about proportional representation, in that last referendum, you just sat at the door and tried to explain to them the 3 different systems that were on offer in BC, people would just glaze over at you and just be like, So it's kind of, you need a way to simplify what your messages are and work with people where they're at.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. Thanks, Paul. And a lot of the organizing training that I got came from Greenpeace, and when I was on staff at Greenpeace. And I want to flag that even though Greenpeace is a very controversial organization and very radical, and many people perceive them as a fringe group, which I believe they're becoming less and less fringe as the movement has built and has really become mainstream in the last decade or two. But no matter how radical they may be perceived as, Greenpeace has been winning for the last 40 years. They've protected Antarctica. I think it's clear to say that we've been losing as the environmental movement over the last 40 years because we're up against such a formidable foe. But Greenpeace has nonetheless been slowing down the rate of environmental destruction and been achieving very real and concrete wins, like keeping Shell out of the Arctic, saving the entire continent of Antarctica from extractive mining for 50 years. There's been all sorts, the Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act in the US. There's been countless changes amongst the 40 countries that Greenpeace operates in. And the sort of creative, kooky stunts that Paul is talking about are tactics, but they're also tactics with strategy behind them. They're designed to get media attention, to get coverage. That media attention and coverage and communication of key ideas or dropping mind bombs is part of the strategy. that has been designed behind those activities. It's not just doing kooky activities for the sake of doing it. It's because they are strategic interventions in the barriers of the system that prop up the status quo. Cool, I'm gonna jump back into my slide deck. And I've now shared the slide deck, so anyone with that link that I've just put in the chat should be able to access it. Feel free to make a copy and adapt it for your own local groups. You're very welcome to take it on. I'm glad people are appreciating the clear and practical presentation. I try to be very practical in my trainings. These are useful tools. Try to stay out of that esoteric stuff. So. Strategy, so a couple more slides before we wrap up, and I'm going to end with a very useful resource and reading on community organizing. But a few more slides. Strategy is approximately the same thing as theory of change. You'll see people use the term, what's your theory of change? They're basically saying, what's your strategy? But usually they're sort of expressed the other way around. A strategy is sort of, here's the goal, this is our strategy to achieve the goals, therefore these are our tactics, and a theory of change sort of turns that on its head. Theory of change is very useful when motivating people to participate in your tactics. If we do ABC tactic, then XYZ will happen, this change will happen. Then if XYZ happens, the next 1, 2, 3 is going to happen. And then after 1, 2, 3 is do, re, mi, so there's this cascade, if it's basically like, if you sign this petition now, then there's this sequence of actions that will end up in us getting proportional representation. Or if you come to this organizing meeting where we organize ourselves into teams to knock on doors, then we're going to get 40,000 people spoken to in the next 2 months, therefore we're going to win the referendum. So that's the theory of change expression of the strategy, which you develop a strategy from goals, strategy, tactics, and you express a theory of change from tactics, strategy, goals. So there's this two-directional thing that happens. Once you've developed your strategy, you can then really clearly explain the motivation behind every action that you're asking people to take. And I see that Keith has just shared a link to Organize BC in the chat. Organize BC, I think, has a lot of great organizing resources that are applicable across the country, not only in BC, but there's literally like a constellation or a galaxy of organizations that specialize in organizing and campaigning as a practice. And if you begin doing this work, you can get deeper and deeper into that community and learn some of these really practical techniques for driving change. And there's even, I think as activists, sometimes we need to be communication professionals, we need to be managers, we need to have an understanding of the legal system. There's all sorts of things that we need to understand, and there's a lot of organizations out there. We need to be great facilitators and public speakers. There's all sorts of organizations that are out there to help change, or to help us train as activists to develop our capacity to drive political change. So some examples of strategies created, using the four questions of strategy that then you can express as a theory of change. In the 2016 Plebiscite campaign, if we divide our group of interested volunteers, it's like 50 people. If we divide them into 5 regional teams, we can knock on 10,000 doors. If we can knock on 10,000 doors, get great media coverage, and we're visible in the community, we can persuade 40,000 voters to vote 1 and 2 for PR. We didn't actually achieve the 40,000 voters. We had only 20,000, but overall turnout was much less than we expected. So we won, even though there was low turnout. For Facebook Unfriend Cole, if we shame Mark Zuckerberg with this really funny viral cartoon video that we created, then Facebook's corporate responsibility team is more likely to accept our campaigners' request to meet with them. So therefore, Greenpeace supporters on the end of this email list, please share this video about Mark Zuckerberg far and wide. Bike-friendly Charlottetown. If we demonstrate the size of the bike-loving constituency in Charlottetown and we present maps to the city to make planning easy, then the city will prioritize making an active transportation plan. And so that's how we motivate people to participate in actions to help demonstrate, to help create the maps and to help generate that bike loving constituency in Charlottetown. So that's it. That's the end of the presentation today. The organizing training. I'm sorry that we didn't get to do so many small breakout groups, but I think it was probably worth it because it would have been quite chaotic with 140 people here. But I'm really glad that it was such a large team. And you know, we'll leave it. Yeah, this is the tip of the iceberg for community organizing theory. This is what I thought was most important to share right now. But as I said, a lot of this was learned. I studied community organizing with Marshall Gantz for 4 months, and every different week we would dive into a different element of community organizing, and I encourage people to begin on that community organizing journey for yourself as well. You can follow me on Twitter here. You can follow Paul Manley on Twitter here. Feel free to follow me and send me direct messages there. I think I'm friends with many of you on Facebook already. And the recommended read or resource that I've got is this link, which I'll also put in the chat. It's a downloadable book called Organising, People, Power and Change. It's written by Marshall Gantz, and you can download it. It's probably like a 50-page booklet. Highly recommend downloading it and keeping it as a PDF, or even better, printing it out and taking it to a binder. And it can be a really useful resource to help you develop your activist practices over time. So.
Does it have a chapter on having fun?
Oh yeah, fun is a major part of.
You got to enjoy what you're doing.
Organizing.
You have to enjoy what you're doing.
100%. Yeah, people don't want to join teams that are full of angst and joyless. People do want to join motivating teams, feel like you're making a difference, where you're having a good time. 100%. Yeah. Cool. We've got some time before the end of the hour too, so I'm happy to hang out here. But if people want to bail after 7 hours of being on video conference today, I totally understand.
Maybe we'll leave the meeting open for another 10 minutes if people do want to stick around. If you want to carry on now, of course you can. We'll leave you with the same message that we shared throughout the day, that we always appreciate your support, your donations, if you're at all able to contribute. And I know that when you do click to leave the meeting, it should then take you straight to that donation page, and it should pop up. And you can always find it, of course, in the Fair Vote Canada website. There's a nice big donate button. So we always appreciate it. It keeps the lights on and it keeps things going. So yeah, I guess that's our day. It's been a great day. It's been a different experience, but I've enjoyed it. I hope you have. Lots of great engagement there in the chat. So that's great to see. It's nice kind of having the two different levels going at the same time. Most of us, I think, most of everyone participating is probably active, at least in some way, with your local groups, your local chapters or organizing committees and so on. So keep up the good work there, and keep following us, of course, on Facebook. There's the National Fair Vote Canada Facebook page. You may have a local page as well. And we'll keep organizing and take some of this extremely useful and practical advice going forward in the coming months and years, for sure. Thanks again to Paul, and thanks again, Anna.
Yeah, thank you, Ted and Anna. These Zoom meetings give a whole new meaning to lockdown. I feel like that's me in this seat and this computer.
Yeah. I'll invite people, if anyone wants to just be part of like some voice-to-voice discussion. Pop a star in the chat, like an asterisk, if you've got a question to ask, and I can bring you off mute. I'll just stay until the top of the hour.
Sure, sounds good.
Gian. It just takes me a moment to take people off mute.
In sandwiches.
There you go, Gian. You should be able to unmute and ask your question now.
Okay, thank you very much, Anna. This has been very inspiring. So I was just thinking about that 1 hour meeting where you go through what the various elements of your strategy are going to be, and you ask the question, why haven't they done it yet? How do you know that the ideas that you have in that room are actually the reasons why they haven't done it yet, as opposed to hypotheses about why they haven't done it yet?
That's a really smart question. Thank you for asking it. You have to rely on the smarts and the insights and the experience of the people who are in the room. And that's one of the reasons to have a whole bunch of people in the room, you know, to have a diverse core team who you think are smart and insightful and engaged people, and who have some experience, you know, working with those decision makers. But even better, you know, before you do your strategy meeting, you should reach out to the people who you think your decision makers are, and you should ask them, why hasn't this been done yet? And very often they will tell you, you know? Or, you know, you can create a hypothesis in your strategizing meeting and say, we think that these are the barriers, but then, you know, maybe your next action in the month after your strategy meeting should be to go and speak with, you know, those 10 decision makers, or the 2 or 3 decision makers. And if you can't access that decision maker, then maybe people who are closer to them, and test that hypothesis and say, are we right? Is this the reason that it hasn't happened? Very often I find that government decision makers want to create more change, but they feel like there isn't enough of a constituency demanding it. So the story I'll share here is when Barack Obama was elected after George Bush, you know, there were a bunch of people in the climate movement, including Bill McKibben from 350.org, in the US climate movement, who actually were invited to the White House. And, you know, there was a meeting about what Obama intended to do on climate change. And he said, and I believe that he was quoting one of the much earlier presidents, just like, I see that the change is necessary. I want to make the change. Now you have to force me to do it. You have to build the movement big enough to make it safe for me as the president who wants to do this, you know, to make it politically safe for me to make these big changes. And I think there's leadership on both sides that's required. You know, politicians can help to lead movements, but they also can't move too far beyond what the Overton window is, that, you know, is the space in which politicians can move. So, you know, ask politicians what they need to make the changes that they might also want to make and that they're aligned with you on. Yeah.
That's a key point, actually, because you know, you can elect the government you want. You work really hard to get them elected. You cannot walk away when you've done that job. You cannot abandon your politicians. And that's what I tell people, you know, on my victory night. I said, do not abandon me now. I need you behind me. I need you to keep pushing these ideas forward. I need you to support me. I need you to tell me when I'm wrong and when I'm right, and keep fighting with me, because you don't just win an election and walk away and expect that the politician's going to do everything. I need you to carry on, you know, with putting that pressure on for the change that you want to see.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gian. Yeah, or Gian. I see that John Bauman also had a question. John?
I'll go. Sure, I'd love to. I'm especially excited and intrigued by the onion of engagement, in part because we're at kind of early stages, I think, in Toronto of really building a vital movement here. And there's no shortage of people, but I picture the onion as kind of this thing with many levels, many doors, so to speak. You want all the doors open when you're starting out, so that people can kind of climb up quickly if they're able. So I guess that's my question to Anna and Paul both, is do you have any tips on kind of how you create that ladder, that onion in the early days?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, excellent question. I think it starts with the 2 questions that are within the organizing statement. Who's in your core team? You know, the 3 to 7 people. You can't build a campaign on your own. You know, you might have the wrong goal, you might have the wrong strategy, you know, but you need to build your core team first. That's the very first part of the organizing statement. You can't set your goal and define your organizing statement without agreeing with, you know, your core team that this is what we are working on as a team. Sure. So get those 3 to 7 people first, and then figure out who's your constituency, who's the broad group, and then I would say you build sort of the easiest 2 levels to build, I think, are your core team and your followers, who are at the outside of that engagement onion. and then you build, you try to fill in the layers sort of in between. Yeah, start with those two. Like, you have to start with the core, and then you build, you know, you establish your followers, and you build in both directions. And I will say that the onion of engagement is a term that I personally made up. It had always been the pyramid of engagement. If you look up the pyramid of engagement, you'll find lots more resources about this online. But I was running a training once, and I didn't like the way that it implied like a hierarchy with leaders at the top and followers at the bottom. So I turned it sort of inside out to make it an onion. Onion was always meant to be a temporary term, but it just stuck. So the onion of engagement, which is a bit goofy. But you'll find more resources with it referred to as the pyramid of engagement online.
One of the things that I recommend doing is to have a questionnaire. So when you get a volunteer in the door, you have a questionnaire about what it is that they're interested in doing, what skills do they have, and when somebody walks in the door, what we did right away is not turn them away, but say, like, do you have time right now? We got something for you to do right now, and engage them immediately. So that, and then they come in and they feel like they're part of a community doing something. Anytime somebody signed up to be a volunteer, we would try to engage them in an activity. So if they signed up online, we would try to engage them in an activity that week, you know, with something that was coming up, something easy to do, show up at a sine wave, show up at this event or that event, and then get them to come to an orientation. And we would just, you know, push them into canvassing, send them out with somebody that's experienced, that's fun to be with, to go and do that, where you just show them how simple it is to stand there with a clipboard and take notes and listen, learn what the you know, the shtick is about electoral reform, and they learn the process. And so that part of the engagement is you're bringing them into the group and making them feel welcome, giving them something to do right away. Don't put them on a list and call them back a month later. Because if they're inspired to do something now, put them to work now.
Yeah, that's great. Should we do one more maybe with Michael Thomas and then wrap it up?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Michael. You can unmute yourself, I think.
Apologies. I not only had to unmute myself, but I also had to plug my earphones back in because I'd just been listening off the computer. I posted the question, and I apologize to Anna, but would it be possible, besides the excellent resources that you've already given us, for us to get your actual Twitter handle and maybe Facebook page address posted in the chats?
Yes, absolutely. I am Anna C. Keenan, C for Camille, on both Facebook and on Twitter.
Super.
So yeah, I'd love to follow up with people. My time is more and more limited, but actually I'm about to get a whole bunch more free time because my 3 years of service on the Fair Vote Canada board is wrapping up today. So this is a really nice sort of last engagement as a board member for Fair Vote Canada, and I intend to use my free time to start on the next big organizing project, which is indeed trying to get myself elected in the next federal election, and supporting the Green Party to get more representation.
Good on you. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and an opportunity also to say thanks to Anna for her time on the board the last 3 years. Of course, we'll be in touch. I'm sure we'll see you again in various things that we do with Fair Vote Canada. But and thanks for all your help today. You've been kind of jack of all trades there, doing the Zoom and presentation and everything. So it's been great. All right, I think we'll wrap it up there. Again, I'm going to turn off all our videos and everything here. If you click the leave button yourselves there, you'll be taken out to the final page, and you can carry on. But that's it for today. So thanks again for joining us, everyone. And we'll do this again for sure.
Thanks so much. Bye.